welcome to another At History Gems video. Today I'm talking about the Vikings, but actually not so much the Vikings themselves, but the history of the Vikings, because it's an example of how history has trends, fashions even. So starting at the beginning, obviously the Vikings happened, and the contemporary chronicles that generally weren't written by the Vikings were fairly negative against them as they turned up and pillaged and maimed and stole and did lots of horrible things to countries like France and Germany and England. However, over many centuries, that kind of got forgotten. It faded away until you get to the Victorian era, where there was a lot of rediscovery of history. That doesn't mean they necessarily got it right.
It's in the 19th century that Vikings started having horned helmets, which is completely historically inaccurate. And overall, they were portrayed as sort of noble savages. It's people that we kind of begrudgingly have to respect. All winged helmets and epic sagas. However, by the 1960s, there was a movement to say, yes, the Vikings did raid and plunder, but they did so many other things as well, and the concentration went on to the craftsmanship, the exploration, the more noble things that the Vikings actually did. If you're ever lucky enough to go to the Gokstag Viking Ship Museum in Oslo, you'll see how beautiful the Viking longship was. It's a sign of the supreme craftsmanship that the Vikings did. Let us not forget that these were the founders of Kiev, and yet they also reached North America too. All very worthy and important points to point out that ultimately they weren't all just about the plunder. We also get kings like Canute, who ruled England for nearly 2 decades. So overall, the Vikings had a very positive impact too. There were cultural importance to them as well. However, by the 1980s, 1990s, it was proven that, quite frankly, we'd gone too far the other way. Yes, there were Viking farmers and they created some wonderful things, but let's face it, for more than 250 years, they rampaged across Europe, killing and maiming and stealing. We find Viking hoards, big piles of cash that presumably somebody buried to try and stop the Vikings getting to it and never reclaimed it. That person probably died at the hands of the Vikings. So while it's important to recognize any civilization's achievements, we also have to recognize that these guys loved a fight. It was considered, according to Viking culture, impossible to go to heaven, Valhalla, unless you died in battle.
History, then, isn't quite as straightforward as you first think. Yes, a certain event happened in a certain year. But the spin on that keeps changing. It can depend on sometimes your political point of view, or your cultural point of view, or your national point of view. But what I would like you to do, what I encourage everybody to try and do, is look at things as much as possible from the contemporary point of view. Try not to dress things up as things are now, and look at how they were. And with that thought, I'll leave you. See you soon.
Like this, but want more? At History Gems has daily historical nuggets on Twitter and on Facebook. You may be watching this video on Facebook or indeed YouTube. However, there is also the Busy Person's Guide to British History. Yes, the Vikings appear in that too, both on Kindle and as a book available on Amazon.